Ever wonder why some people never seem to lose their cool, yet somehow they're always 10 steps ahead of everyone else? You know that friend who doesn't yell, doesn't throw fits, but somehow always ends up winning in the end? Well, there's a pretty good chance they might be an INFJ. And here's the thing, they're not just lucky. They're strategic. Like really strategic. Today, we're going to dive deep into the fascinating world of INFJs and discover the 7 mind games they absolutely dominate. Now, before you think this is about being manipulative or cruel, hold on. We're talking about a personality type that values harmony and genuine connection above almost everything else. But when pushed, when someone crosses their boundaries or threatens what they care about, that's when the strategic genius comes out to play. So buckle up, because you're about to learn why INFJs don't get mad, they get even smarter. 1. The strategic silence. Let's talk about the first mind game INFJs absolutely dominate, strategic silence. And man, oh man, is this one powerful. You know how most people feel the need to fill every awkward silence? They'll ramble, over-explain, or say things they don't mean just to make the discomfort go away. Well, INFJs do the complete opposite. When they're upset or disappointed with someone, they'll go quiet. Not the cold shoulder, passive-aggressive kind of quiet. We're talking about a calm, composed, deliberate silence that speaks volumes. Here's what makes this so effective. Silence creates space. And in that space, the other person starts to squirm. They begin questioning themselves. Did I do something wrong? Why aren't they responding? Are they mad at me? The person who wronged the INFJ suddenly becomes hyper-aware of their own actions. They start replaying conversations in their head, looking for what went wrong. Meanwhile, the INFJ is watching all of this unfold. They're not being cruel, they're simply giving themselves time to process their emotions and decide on the best course of action. But the side effect? The other person basically interrogates themselves and often comes to their own conclusions about what they did wrong. They might even apologize without the INFJ having to say a single word. I've seen this play out countless times. An INFJ gets hurt by a friend's thoughtless comment. Instead of snapping back, they just get quiet. They don't engage in the usual banter. They keep their responses short and polite but distant. Within days, sometimes hours, the friend is reaching out, apologizing, asking what's wrong, and genuinely reflecting on their behavior. The INFJ never had to explain, accuse, or confront. Their silence did all the work for them. It's brilliant, really, because by not engaging emotionally, the INFJ maintains the high ground. They don't say things they'll regret. They don't escalate the situation. And they give the other person an opportunity to do better, all without uttering a single accusation. 2. Emotional mirroring. Alright, here's where things get really interesting. INFJs have this almost supernatural ability to mirror other people's emotions and energy back at them. It's like holding up an emotional mirror and saying, "Here, take a good look at yourself. Let me paint you a picture." Imagine someone's being condescending or rude to an INFJ. Most people would either get defensive and fire back, or they get hurt and withdraw. But an INFJ? They'll respond with that exact same energy, but in such a subtle, controlled way that the other person suddenly sees how they're coming across. For example, if someone's being dismissive of an INFJ's feelings, the INFJ might calmly start dismissing that person's concerns in the exact same manner. Not in a petty, obvious way. That's not their style. Instead, they'll use the same tone, the same level of interest, or lack thereof, and the same body language. And you know what happens? The other person gets a taste of their own medicine and usually doesn't like it one bit. The genius of this approach is that INFJs aren't being openly confrontational. They're not saying, "You're being a jerk." They're showing the person what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that behavior. It's a lesson taught through experience rather than words. And here's the thing. Because INFJs are so emotionally intelligent, they can do this without it turning into a petty back and forth. They know exactly how much mirroring to do, when to do it, and when to pull back. It's calculated, it's controlled, and it's incredibly effective at making people self-aware. I remember reading about an INFJ who had a colleague who constantly interrupted her in meetings. Instead of complaining to HR or making a scene, she started doing the exact same thing to him, but only to him, and only in the same contexts where he'd interrupted her. Within a couple weeks, he pulled her aside and said, "Hey, I feel like we're talking over each other a lot lately." She just smiled and said, "Yeah, I've noticed that too. Maybe we should both work on being better listeners." Problem solved. He never interrupted her again. 3. The long game. If there's one thing INFJs excel at, it's playing the long game. While most people are focused on winning the battle, INFJs are focused on winning the war. They're not interested in quick, satisfying revenge or immediate gratification. They're thinking months, sometimes years, down the line. This is where their intuitive nature really shines. INFJs can see patterns and predict outcomes in ways that seem almost psychic. They understand that actions have consequences, and they're willing to wait for those consequences to naturally unfold. They don't need to force karma's hand. They just need to position themselves correctly and let nature take its course. Here's what this looks like in practice. Let's say an INFJ has a toxic person in their life, maybe a manipulative friend or an unethical coworker. While other personality types might confront them immediately or complain loudly to everyone who'll listen, the INFJ takes a different approach. They start quietly documenting things. They maintain professional relationships while slowly distancing themselves emotionally. They position themselves favorably with key people. And they wait. Eventually, and it almost always happens, that toxic person's behavior catches up with them. They slip up, they show their true colors to the wrong person, or their actions finally have consequences. And when that happens, the INFJ is already 3 steps removed from the situation. They're protected, they're clean, and they're ready to move forward while the toxic person deals with the fallout of their own choices. This isn't about being vindictive or holding grudges. INFJs don't sit around hoping for bad things to happen to people who've wronged them. They just understand that people who consistently make poor choices eventually face natural consequences. And rather than getting caught up in the drama, INFJs prefer to strategically position themselves to avoid collateral damage. I've heard stories of INFJs who quietly left toxic workplaces, and within a year, the whole department collapsed because the problems they'd been silently enduring finally became everyone's problems. The INFJ didn't expose anyone or burn bridges. They just removed themselves from a sinking ship before it went under. That's strategic thinking at its finest. 4. Information control. Here's a mind game that INFJs are absolute masters at: controlling information flow. And no, we're not talking about being secretive or manipulative in a harmful way. We're talking about understanding that information is power and being very deliberate about what you share, with whom, and when. INFJs are naturally private people. They don't wear their hearts on their sleeves, and they don't share every thought that crosses their minds. This gives them a massive advantage because while other people are oversharing and revealing their strategies, vulnerabilities, and plans, INFJs are listening, observing, and filing everything away. But here's where it gets strategic. INFJs also know how to selectively share information to achieve specific outcomes. They understand social dynamics well enough to know that telling person A something will likely result in person B finding out, which will influence how person C reacts. It's like they're conducting an orchestra of information, and they know exactly which instruments to bring in at which moment. For instance, if an INFJ is dealing with office politics and knows that someone's been spreading rumors about them, they won't go around defending themselves to everyone. That's exhausting and often ineffective. Instead, they'll carefully share the truth with 1 or 2 key influencers, people who are well respected and naturally share information. Those people then organically spread the accurate version of events, which carries way more weight than if the INFJ had tried to defend themselves directly. Or consider this scenario: an INFJ knows that a friend has been gossiping about them. Instead of confronting the friend directly, which the friend would probably just deny, the INFJ might casually mention to the friend that they've been thinking about how important discretion and loyalty are in friendships. They're not accusing anyone. They're just sharing a thought. But the message is crystal clear. The friend knows. And usually the behavior stops. This level of information control also protects INFJs from being blindsided. Because they share less about themselves, there's less ammunition for others to use against them. Meanwhile, because they're excellent listeners and observers, they usually have a comprehensive understanding of everyone else's situations, motivations, and weaknesses. They don't use this information maliciously, but they're definitely aware of it when they need to navigate tricky social situations. 5. The disappearing act. Yes, the famous INFJ door slam. But let's talk about what it really is: a strategic disappearing act that leaves people wondering what the heck just happened. Here's the thing about INFJs: they're incredibly patient and forgiving. They'll give you second chances, third chances, even fourth chances. They'll try to understand your perspective, make excuses for your behavior, and hope you'll change. But here's what most people don't realize: INFJs are keeping track. Every broken promise, every disrespectful comment, every time you take advantage of their kindness gets filed away in their mental database. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, the INFJ is just gone. Not dramatically. Not with a big confrontation or a list of grievances. They just fade out of your life like morning mist. They stop responding to texts as quickly. They're suddenly busy when you want to hang out. They're polite but distant. And before you know it, you realize you haven't actually had a real conversation with them in months. This is one of the most powerful mind games in the INFJ arsenal because it completely flips the script. The person who took them for granted is suddenly the one chasing, the one confused, the one feeling the loss. And the INFJ? They've already processed the relationship, mourned it, and moved on emotionally. They're not sitting around waiting for an apology or hoping things will change. They made their decision and executed it with surgical precision. What makes this so effective is that it's not coming from a place of revenge. INFJs aren't trying to hurt anyone, they're protecting themselves. They've realized that some people will never change, and that continuing the relationship would only drain their energy and compromise their peace. So they make the hard choice to walk away, even when it hurts. And here's the kicker: this often teaches the other person a lesson that confrontation never could. When someone who was always there, always patient, always understanding suddenly removes themselves from your life, it creates a void. It makes you reflect. Many people have shared stories about how losing an INFJ friend made them realize how much they'd taken that person for granted and prompted real self-reflection and growth. But whether the other person learns from it or not, the INFJ is already thriving without them. That's the real power move. 6. Strategic vulnerability. Now this one might surprise you. You'd think that being vulnerable would be the opposite of playing mind games, right? But INFJs have figured out how to use vulnerability as a strategic tool, and it's absolutely genius. Here's how it works. INFJs are generally pretty guarded about their deeper feelings and struggles. They're the ones everyone comes to for advice, but they rarely reveal their own problems. So when an INFJ does choose to be vulnerable with someone, it's a big deal. It creates instant intimacy and trust. The person feels honored, special, chosen. And in that moment of connection, the INFJ gains incredible influence. But here's the strategic part: INFJs are very selective about when, how, and with whom they share their vulnerability. They're not trauma dumping on everyone they meet. They're carefully choosing moments where showing vulnerability will achieve a specific purpose. Maybe they're trying to deepen a relationship with someone who matters to them. Maybe they're trying to teach someone a lesson about empathy. Or maybe they're testing someone's character by revealing something personal and seeing how they respond. For example, an INFJ might share a personal struggle with someone who's been judgmental or unkind. Not to gain sympathy, but to humanize themselves and remind the other person that everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about. This often completely transforms how that person sees and treats the INFJ going forward. Or consider this: an INFJ might share a carefully chosen vulnerability with someone they suspect is being fake or manipulative. They're essentially setting a trap. A genuine person will respond with empathy and reciprocal vulnerability. A manipulative person will either dismiss the vulnerability or try to use it as ammunition later. Either way, the INFJ now knows exactly who they're dealing with. This strategic use of vulnerability also gives INFJs a way to control narratives. By choosing what to share and what to keep private, They shape how others perceive them while maintaining their essential privacy. It's like they're giving you a peek through a window, but they've carefully chosen which window to open and at what time of day the lighting will be just right. And the beautiful thing is, even though it's strategic, it's still genuine. INFJs aren't making up feelings or faking their vulnerability. They're just being very intentional about when and where they lower their walls. That's not manipulation, that's wisdom. 7. The moral high ground. Last but definitely not least, let's talk about how INFJs use the moral high ground to win every single argument without even raising their voice. INFJs are deeply principled people. They have a strong internal value system, and they strive to live in alignment with those values even when it's difficult. This isn't just about being self-righteous or holier than thou. It's about genuinely trying to be a good person and do the right thing. But here's where it becomes strategic. By consistently taking the high road, INFJs make it incredibly difficult for anyone to paint them as the villain. Think about it. When someone tries to drag you into drama and you refuse to participate, you automatically win. When someone speaks badly about you and you respond with grace and maturity, you look good and they look petty. When someone tries to manipulate you and you calmly call it out without getting emotional, they lose their power. INFJs understand this intuitively. They know that reputation matters. They know that how you respond to conflict says more about you than the conflict itself. So even when they're hurt, angry, or frustrated, they make the conscious choice to respond in a way that aligns with their values. They don't gossip, even when gossip has been spread about them. They don't retaliate, even when retaliation would be justified. They don't stoop to the level of people who've wronged them. And you know what? This drives their adversaries absolutely crazy. Because you can't beat someone who won't fight dirty. You can't make someone look bad when they consistently act with integrity. You can't win an argument against someone who's clearly in the right. I've seen this play out in workplace scenarios where an INFJ is dealing with a difficult coworker. The coworker might be spreading rumors, taking credit for the INFJ's work, or creating a hostile environment. But instead of fighting fire with fire, the INFJ just keeps doing excellent work, treating everyone with respect, and documenting everything. Eventually, the coworker's behavior becomes obvious to everyone, while the INFJ remains above reproach. When management finally has to step in, there's no question about who's in the wrong. This isn't about being passive or letting people walk all over you. It's about understanding that true power comes from integrity, not from matching someone else's poor behavior. INFJs know that taking the high road isn't always easy, but it's always effective in the long run. Plus, there's this added benefit. By maintaining the moral high ground, INFJs can sleep well at night. They don't lie awake replaying arguments or regretting things they said in anger. They know they handled things the right way, even if it was harder in the moment. That peace of mind is its own reward. The psychology behind INFJ's strategy. So let's dig a little deeper into why INFJs are so naturally good at these strategic approaches. It's not just about personality type. There's some serious psychology at play here. First, INFJs have what psychologists call high emotional intelligence. They can accurately perceive, understand, and manage emotions, both their own and others. This gives them a massive advantage in any social situation because they're reading layers of communication that most people completely miss. Body language, tone of voice, microexpressions, energy shifts. INFJs pick up on all of it and process it in real time. Second, INFJs are systems thinkers. They don't just see individual events or interactions. They see patterns, connections, and underlying structures. When something happens, they're not just thinking about that one thing. They're thinking about what led to it, what might result from it, and how it fits into the bigger picture. This allows them to anticipate consequences and plan several steps ahead, which is essentially the definition of strategic thinking. Third, INFJs have a strong need for authenticity and meaning. They can't just go through life on autopilot, reacting to things as they happen. They need to understand the why behind everything. This means they spend a lot of time reflecting on their experiences, analyzing their own behavior and motivations, and constantly refining their approach to life. All of this self-reflection naturally develops strategic thinking skills. Fourth, INFJs are introverted intuitives. which means they spend a lot of time in their heads running mental simulations. Before they do or say anything significant, they've often already played out multiple scenarios in their mind. If I say this, they'll probably respond like that, which means I should. This mental rehearsal means they're rarely caught off guard, and they've usually already prepared for several possible outcomes before entering any important conversation or situation. Finally, INFJs have a protective instinct, both for themselves and for the people they care about. They've often been hurt in the past by being too trusting or too open, so they've learned to be more cautious and strategic. But unlike some personality types that respond to hurt by building walls, INFJs respond by becoming more skilled at navigating human relationships. They don't want to become cold or cynical, they just want to be smarter about who they trust and how they engage with the world. All of these psychological factors combine to create someone who's naturally strategic, even if they don't consciously think of themselves that way. For INFJs, a lot of this stuff is just instinct. It's how they've learned to survive and thrive in a world that doesn't always understand them. When INFJ's strategy goes wrong, it wouldn't be fair to paint INFJs as perfect strategic geniuses who never make mistakes. So let's talk about when this strategic approach can backfire or cause problems. First, sometimes INFJs can overthink things to the point of paralysis. Because they're always analyzing situations and considering multiple angles, they can get stuck in their heads and fail to take action. They might spend so much time planning the perfect strategic response that the moment passes, or the situation resolves itself in a way they didn't anticipate. All that mental energy goes to waste. Second, the strategic silence we talked about earlier can sometimes be misinterpreted. The INFJ thinks they're giving themselves time to process and giving the other person space to reflect, but the other person might just think the INFJ isn't bothered or doesn't care. This can create distance in relationships that didn't need to have that distance. Third, INFJs can sometimes fall into the trap of being too strategic, treating every relationship and interaction like a chess game that needs to be won. This can make life exhausting and can prevent them from experiencing genuine spontaneity and vulnerability. Not everything needs to be analyzed and planned. Sometimes you just have to live in the moment and let things unfold naturally. Fourth, the INFJ door slam, while sometimes necessary, can also be unnecessarily harsh. Sometimes people make mistakes without realizing the impact, and they'd be willing to do better if given the chance to understand. But if an INFJ cuts them off completely without explanation, that person never gets the opportunity to learn and grow from the experience. It might protect the INFJ, but it doesn't contribute to the other person's development. Fifth, strategic thinking can sometimes border on control issues. If an INFJ is too focused on managing outcomes and protecting themselves from potential hurt, they might not allow relationships to develop organically. They might sabotage good things because they're anticipating problems that never actually materialize. And finally, there's the risk of becoming cynical. If you're always analyzing people's motives and preparing for the worst, it's easy to lose faith in humanity. INFJs can sometimes become so skilled at seeing through people that they forget not everyone has hidden agendas. Most people are just doing their best, making mistakes, and trying to figure life out. Not everyone is a strategic threat that needs to be managed. The healthiest INFJs recognize these potential pitfalls and work to balance their strategic nature with openness, trust, and grace. They use their strategic skills when necessary to protect themselves, but they don't let those skills prevent them from experiencing genuine connection and spontaneity. Conclusion. So there you have it, 7 mind games that INFJs absolutely dominate, not because they're manipulative or cruel, but because they've learned to navigate the world strategically. From strategic silence to emotional mirroring, from playing the long game to controlling information flow, from the disappearing act to strategic vulnerability, and finally, to maintaining the moral high ground, INFJs have developed a sophisticated toolkit for protecting their peace and achieving their goals. But remember, at the heart of all this strategy is a person who feels deeply, cares genuinely, and wants to make the world a better place. The strategy isn't who they are, it's how they protect who they are in a world that doesn't always understand or appreciate their unique gifts. INFJs don't get mad, they get strategic. Not because they're cold or calculating, but because they've learned that emotional intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking are far more effective than anger ever could be. They've figured out that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, maintaining your integrity, and letting natural consequences do the work for you. Whether you're an INFJ recognizing yourself in these patterns, or someone who's been on the receiving end of INFJ strategy, I hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights. Understanding personality types isn't about putting people in boxes. It's about appreciating the different ways we all navigate this complex, challenging, beautiful thing called life. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this entire script. If you found this valuable, if it helped you understand yourself or someone you care about better, then this has been time well spent. Remember, we're all just doing our best with the tools we've been given. INFJs happen to have been given some pretty impressive strategic tools. And the world is better for it. Until next time, stay strategic, stay authentic, and above all, stay true to yourself.